Welcome to The Dish on Divorce. I'm Leanne Townsend.
And I'm Jennifer Barkin.
And we're really excited. This is our first launch episode. And so we want to tell you a little bit about what The Dish on Divorce is. Jennifer and I, we want to be like your girlfriends who are going to do the dish on everything to do with divorce. It could be something light, it could be celebrity gossip, it could be some fashion, divorce fashion, but also more serious topics because divorce is a serious subject. But we want to keep it light as well because it is such a serious subject. So that's what our show is about. And I have to give a shout out to Jocelyn Luck because she is the one who came up with the name of our show.
Thank you, Jocelyn.
Why don't you tell everyone how that happened?
Okay, so we were pretty stuck. For a few weeks, we were throwing some names back and forth. And our favorite was called Legally Blonde. What else? But, you know, that's been used. And that may not be a great idea to get sued at the beginning of our show. But the problem was we didn't like anything else nearly as much. And we kept going back to this Legally Blonde, Legally Blonde, Legally Blonde. And I forget some of the other ones, but they just didn't have that ring to it.
Yeah.
And Jocelyn Luck, thank you again, because you came up with the name for our show.
Yes.
We have to give her something nice.
Well, we will. And so for those of you who don't know us, who haven't seen us before, my name's Leanne Townsend and Jennifer Barkin. And what we thought we'd do is we just chat a little bit about our background so that you can get to know us. And that way you can learn about, what our credentials are to be dishing on divorce in the first place. So Jennifer, why don't you start by telling everybody what your background is and what your profession is?
Okay, so my educational background or professional background, I have an MSW that stands for Masters in Social Work. So I studied a lot of child development in that program. Then I went on to become an accredited family mediator. So we have to study family law, dealing with conflict resolution, domestic violence, all sorts of things. I went on, studied parenting coordination. Parenting coordination is when people have their settlements and they have their agreements, but they're parenting children and whatever's in that agreement isn't working for them. So rather than going to court, they may see a parenting coordinator. So I do some of that. I do some divorce coaching, some arbitration, and some counseling with children around separation and divorce and custody and access assessments.
You're like a one-stop shop.
Voice of the child reports. Basically, family divorce services. That's me.
And what's something that listeners wouldn't know about you or that most people that know you don't know about you?
I don't want anyone to get too jealous. But I used to do TV commercials in my early 20s. So not only did I do Labatt's Blue and Carling O'Keefe, I was a Lotto 649 elf, and I'm really proud of that one. Yeah.
Your days, you've really changed what you're doing since those days. So.
Pretty much.
But here you are back in front of the camera again.
Yeah. Yeah. Leanne, tell me about you. I know a lot, but our listeners don't.
Yeah, so I'm a family law lawyer. I practice law in Toronto. I'm a partner at the law firm Brody Thorning, LLP. And I practice exclusively in family law. I have a background in domestic violence in particular. I was a Crown attorney for over 16 years and the lead Crown prosecutor in the area of domestic violence. So I do get a lot of clients where both victims and perpetrators of domestic violence in my practice. And I have a podcast called Divorcing Well, which I'm really excited about. I reached the over 10,000 downloads milestone, so I never thought I would get that far, so I'm very pleased with that. And I have two teenagers who are my pride and joy and the loves of my life.
I feel bad now I didn't mention my children. Hi, Courtney. Hi, Nikki.
So, as I mentioned at the outset, we want to talk about all things divorce, both the light subjects and the heavy subjects. And what a perfect time to be launching our show because we get to talk about the Kardashians. You know, it wouldn't be TV or video if you didn't get to chat about the Kardashians. And so in the news right now, of course, Kim and Kanye. Kim's filed for divorce. And so I thought we'd chat about that a little bit.
Okay, so I've been following it a little bit. And one thing that I found very interesting was I read the other day that Kim had put Laura Wasser, who's a real top divorce attorney in the U.S., on retainer back in August. So I know a little bit about retainer, Leanne, so you can explain this to me a little. But from my understanding, if you want to use a lawyer's services, you'll give them a retainer, which is a sum of money, right? Sort of like a deposit. Yeah. But I also have heard that some people do a little trick. And that little trick is, I'm going to put a couple of lawyers on retainer so that my ex-spouse can't get great representation.
Yes.
Do you see that?
I do see that happening. I mean, I personally have never had a client come to me and just put me on retainer and then never use me. But I have heard of people doing that to kind of burn, because if a client puts you on retainer, then you automatically cannot represent the spouse, because every time a lawyer gets a new client, we have to do what's called a conflict check, which is there to make sure that that lawyer and that law firm have not represented the spouse in any capacity beforehand. So by putting a lawyer on retainer, you're essentially prohibiting your spouse from being able to retain them.
So with conflicts, what if my mother, my brother, my sister used a lawyer? Is that a conflict?
Not necessarily. It would only depend if your ex was an adverse party to them. So if your mother was suing your ex for something, then he wouldn't be able to retain that lawyer who'd represented your mother because he would have been an adverse party in her lawsuit. So it doesn't just have to be in a family law matter, but any time an adverse party has been represented by a firm, that firm cannot then represent the other side in a legal matter.
Got it. So with Kim and Kanye, they have 4 kids.
Yeah.
I think they were married, I don't remember exactly, but something like what we call in Ontario the mid-length marriage.
Yeah, I think 7 years, actually, because I remember reading it and I was thinking about that 7-year itch. I don't know if either of them are getting it, but it's around 7 years, I think, 2014.
So my question about the Kim Kanye situation, Kanye has been very forward and he had a few public breakdowns with his mental health diagnosis of bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
Now, bipolar disorder, people can be okay and it can be treated and treated very well. But if Kim decides to go for custody of those 4 children, or as in Ontario, we're going to be saying soon, decision making.
Yes.
Do you think that Kanye's mental health issues are going to play a factor?
They could. I mean, I noticed in the media reports that I was reading that they are looking at having a joint custody situation and shared parenting. That's what they put out through their PR people. I mean, whether that is ultimately going to be what happens, who knows? But the issue would come down to whether Kanye is able to parent effectively. If his mental health is affecting his ability to parent and he's putting the children in danger in any capacity by, either abuse or negligence, then his bipolar condition could be used as a reason for her to either have custody and custody and more parenting time, or at least custody. But from what I understand, and I'm certainly no mental health expert, I mean, bipolar, is something that is readily treatable, and if people are being treated and they're following their treatment plan, it shouldn't be an issue. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, I think it's kind of a difficult situation. You marry somebody, and at the time they're a certain way, and then maybe down the road, or maybe at the time they had a mental health issue that was, they were being treated for and it was fine, or maybe they acquire a mental health illness down the road. I mean, I see this happening where people become depressed, severely depressed, years into a marriage, and
especially now.
Yeah, especially now. And so, what are your thoughts, Jennifer, on you marry someone and you think this is the person I'm getting, and then they do develop a mental health condition down the road. Is somebody being a horrible person, like say, is Kim being a horrible person for divorcing Kanye because of his bipolar condition, and when it's not treated, the types of things that he does?
I think it's a really hard question, just because we're all sort of looking in, and it's so easy to judge when we're not living in that situation. You know, what goes on in people's homes is very different than what we see as the public on the outside, right? So who knows? I mean, you know, we're seeing he has a mental health condition. She wants out of this marriage. She doesn't want to do it anymore. She's been publicly embarrassed by him several times. I think about a year ago, maybe longer. He even said, I'm going to divorce her publicly, and she was pretty mortified. But we don't really know what's going on. And I don't think that we can judge without knowing what's going on. Mental health is a huge, huge spectrum. And if people aren't looking after themselves, they can be very difficult to live with. And you have to look out for your own mental health as well. And I don't think that that's being selfish. I think that's also survival.
Yeah.
So I really think it depends on the particulars of people's situations and stories.
You know, and I would agree with that. I think it really does depend. And sometimes, too, if your children are being really affected by this, you know, you're actually being a better parent by getting them out of the situation if it's that bad. And I think as a parent, you have an obligation to do that. So, you know, my heart goes out to anybody who is in this type of situation because it is so difficult. And there's no easy answers. You know, and one of the things I touched on that I run into, you know, with clients, that I've had a number of clients come and see me, is they have a spouse who's become severely depressed. You know, they've been married 15 years even, and their spouse has become severely depressed, isn't working, and won't do anything to change that. And, you know, that is a tough situation. Does that mean you have to live out your life supporting this person, you know, financially, emotionally, you know, in every way possible when they refuse to get any help? You know, that's something that comes up too.
That's a huge piece. If people won't get help for themselves, you can't love anybody enough to make them better.
No.
You can't heal, and that is much too much responsibility to put on anybody. So you can try and you can urge them to get help, and you can even give ultimatums for people to get help. But at the end of the day, they control their own behavior. And if they're not willing to get help, you know.
No, and I think that's a really important point because like another area that falls under the mental health spectrum is addiction. And I know I often, again, get clients and they have a spouse who's got into a substance abuse problem and they love them and they want to help them and they've tried to do everything they can to help them, but often have, you know, almost become an enabler in the relationship, and you know, they hope that their love will, you know, be enough to make that person better. But as you just said, it's not, unfortunately.
It's not. I see quite a bit of addiction in my practice, and I see a lot of parents in my practice. So a lot of agreements that I write, number one, have to make sure that the children are safe. That's forefront of any agreement that I do. But if there's addiction, etc., also realize that people may get treatment and people may get better, right? So I like to think of the parenting plan, which is basically the parenting document on how two people are going to co-parent moving forward, as a living agreement, meaning something that should be revisited, sometimes every 6 months, sometimes every year, depending what it is, because children's needs change as well. So when there's addiction, it's often, you know, person that's having the issue is going to seek this sort of treatment. Then we may have some supervised visitation. Then when that's going okay, then the next level could be, okay, maybe some short visits before we get to the overnight visits and so on and so on. So basically reintegration of allowing that parent to be the best parent that they can be.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point for people to know who out there who, you know, are suffering like from addiction or substance abuse or a mental health situation, is that the family law courts and the family law process it doesn't want to take children away from their parents. Like, that is not the goal of any court or any lawyer or, anyone, but it's to make sure that parents are well enough to be able to parent their children to the best of their ability. So if you do have an issue, the best thing you can do, not only for yourself, but for your children, and to be able to retain custody and time with them, is to go and get help. And as long as you're getting help, no one is going to judge you or belittle you or anything for that. I mean, that's the key. You have to be showing that you're taking steps to deal with your situation. Mm-hmm. Now, Kanye and Kim had a prenup. So I don't know whether Kanye initiated or Kim. I'm suspecting it was Kris Jenner who probably came up with the idea. But
I think it's Mama Kris.
Yeah, Mama Kris. So, but they have a prenup. So, again, the initial media reports are that, they've got a prenup, so things are straightforward and it shouldn't be too complicated or too hostile. So, first of all, as in your role, do you ever deal with prenups?
I get more requests for postnuptial agreements, and lately cohabitation agreements, because sometimes you'll have families that have some money and they're concerned because living together and moving in together is getting very common for younger people. So they're very concerned about that. So they're wanting some sort of cohabitation agreement. I'm seeing those.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you could explain, in case some of the listeners don't know, what's the difference between a prenup and a postnup or a cohabitation agreement?
Okay, so cohabitation agreement sounds like it is. You're going to cohabitate. You're going to live together.
You're not going to be married.
Not married. Prenuptial, the key word here is nuptial, so before you get married. I have assets, you have assets. We're going to create some sort of agreement saying, if this marriage doesn't work, this is what I'm keeping, this is what I'm giving you, and however you want to frame it. So basically, in case we get divorced down the road, it's all there. It's all there. And then sometimes, in certain circumstances, people didn't get that prenuptial agreement, and then they got married. So they may do a postnuptial, meaning we've had our wedding ceremony already, we're going to do the agreement now.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of prenups. I tell, lots of prospective clients, people who are getting married, that a prenup is a great idea. I think it's a great idea whether you have money, don't have money. It's especially a good idea, though, if you do have money that you want to protect. And especially if it's like a second marriage and you have children from a previous marriage, and you want to make sure that your children are protected, because that's where things can get really messy and really ugly. And I think, why not have an agreement that lays everything out, how, while you're on good terms, because you're just starting the relationship, why not have an agreement while you're on good terms as to how things would look, if you split up. And I don't know, a lot of people say they're not romantic, and, they're not. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think, marriage is partly a business decision too. And again, I know that doesn't sound very romantic, but with the high rate of divorce that's out there, I think that people need to approach it that way. And a prenup, a marriage contract, a cohabitation agreement, to me, those are only good things, and they don't cost that much to have one done, and so they're well worth it.
Do you find, Leanne, though, that older people are more comfortable with the idea, whereas younger people are a little more romantic?
Definitely that's the case, so. Especially people who've already been through one divorce. They're like, yeah, I want one of those. And I have clients right now who are going through their first divorce, and they're saying, like, I'm going to come and see you later on and get a prenup the next time around, because I don't want to go through this again. And I think that, makes sense. Older people, they have a sense of, they've lost some of the romanticism maybe of what marriage is, and they understand that romance is part of it. But, also there is that financial business aspect to it, and you want to protect yourself and your children.
Especially the children.
Yeah, for sure.
Are you seeing graduated agreements, meaning you stick with me for a year, you'll get this much, you stick with me for 5, you get this much? Is that common?
I wouldn't say it's like common, but you do see that. And I think, again, I almost see agreements like that, or I almost want to call them like the gold digger agreements, because it's where usually you have someone who has a lot of money and the other person maybe is much younger too and doesn't. And so you incorporate it into the agreement that if they stay together, this many years, the spousal support will be, this much, and then it'll increase as the length of the relationship increases. And I mean, again, it's not very romantic, but I think that's fair. If I was somebody bringing a lot of wealth into a marriage and my partner, was a lovely person, I loved them to pieces, but they had nothing, I would probably want to protect myself that way too. And the longer, because at a certain point, I think it becomes irrelevant. If you've been together 20 years, then I don't think you should be, squawking about spousal support. But if you're together 2 years, maybe it's an issue.
Absolutely.
So now I wasn't aware actually that as a mediator, you could do marriage contracts. So that's helpful information, I think, for listeners, because I mean, it's certainly something that I do regularly, lawyers do, but I know like everybody out there hates lawyers. So, it's good for them to know that they don't necessarily have to come to one of us to get it done. They can see someone like Jennifer. And that's part of being a mediator? Or
family mediation? Really, what's mediating? Mediating is negotiating an agreement.
Yeah.
So other types of family mediation can revolve around elderly and wishes for elderly. Sometimes you have siblings and somebody wants to send mom to a place for mom and the other kids don't want to do that, or somebody wants to hire a caregiver. Things like that. A will where some kid feels shafted.
You do wills as well?
I haven't, but some people, not negotiating a will, but sometimes after a will is read and a child is left out and feels that they got ripped off in some sort of way, some mediators will mediate those sort of things. But any sort of family negotiation, saying that, and this is my opinion, which I have a lot of, but I do believe that because a mediated agreement, whether you want to call it a memorandum of understanding or mediation summary notes, it's not a legal binding document. Therefore, I think if anybody's going to mediate anything, at any time, either it's before negotiating, during negotiation, or at the end, see a lawyer, know your rights and obligations. So even if I was mediating a cohab or whatever may be, see a lawyer. The lawyer may say to you, you'd be entitled to a lot more, or, that's really not very good for you. I cannot say that because I'm neutral.
Right. No, and I think that's important for people to understand. A mediator is a neutral party, and if you want someone who's going to advocate for you and your rights and what your obligations are, and give you a slap in the head, figuratively, not literally, if you're not stepping up to your obligations, that's the role of a lawyer. And and we do that. I have clients, to be honest, like I feel like they're little children sometimes, where I'm lecturing them like a child, a grown man, but that's part of my job too. So that's where I guess our roles are slightly different. Even though I can still help people come to an agreement, I can also take a side. And that must be hard, because I would find it very hard not to want to take a side when I'm dealing with a couple who is splitting up.
It can be very difficult. There's a lot of checking in with yourself. And what I mean by checking in, is this triggering me for any reason? I also went through a divorce many years ago. Is this triggering certain responses from me? But where I am allowed to have an opinion is when it comes to the children and the well-being of the children. So if somebody doesn't want to show income because they don't want their child support based upon income, whatever may be, the rights of the children, I'm allowed. I don't have to be so neutral in that situation. I don't have to be neutral at all in that situation when it comes to kids. But at the end of the day, you have to learn how to separate that people know their own lives best, and I can't take what I feel and what would be great for my life and transfer it onto them.
No, and that's one of the challenges I face at times, because as a member of the Law Society, a lawyer, we have certain professional obligations and ethics that we have to follow, else we could get in trouble. And we could also get sued if we did something. And so I often find I have a couple come in and, they don't want to do financial disclosure. It's like the biggest hurdle with people is getting them to do their financial disclosure, because it's like doing a long tax return. People don't enjoy it, and they want me to do a separation agreement without financial disclosure, and it drives me crazy because I'm putting myself in a very vulnerable position with both the Law Society and potentially getting sued down the road. But yet I understand, like they feel like, why do I want to spend thousands of dollars having lawyers combing through our finances when we both know what we want? We agree on this. Why do we have to do that? And that is one of my biggest frustrations. And I don't know, do you get that kind of situation?
Are you able to say, though, but this is the law of Ontario?
Oh, definitely.
So
they don't care.
It's not my fault. Listen, I hear you. I wish you didn't have to, but it's the law.
Yeah, no, they don't care. So
sometimes I get clients who want to see a mediator because they think that they can outsmart their partner by not having to make financial disclosure, and then they're in for this rude awakening when, no, I'm asking for all the same things.
Oh, exactly.
So it does happen. Definitely it happens.
Well, I've really enjoyed chatting with you for our first launch episode, and we're looking forward to doing many more of these, and we want it to be like a coffee chat. We're your friends, and we want you to send us your ideas for topics. So, DM us, message us, email us, because we really want this to be a show for you, our audience, and our listeners, that we're talking about things that matter to you.
Absolutely. Well, I'm happy that everybody joined in today. Tell your friends, tell your coworkers, tell everybody you know. We'd love it. And thank you again.
Yes, thanks so much. And I'm Leanne Townsend.
And I'm Jennifer Barkin.
And we'll see you next time on The Dish on Divorce.